John Olsen is the author of the Stranger Bridgerland series, which is a collection of true paranormal stories that delve into the mysterious world of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, glitches, and other unexplained phenomena from around the globe. And he's my guest today. What I learned from this podcast is the importance of sharing your story with someone who can understand. So let's check it out. So thank you for being here. It's such a treat to talk to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. It's always great to talk to new people and be on shows and just talk about the paranormal is it's really fun.
Yeah. So how did you become a paranormal researcher?
So I grew up in a home that was built in 1883, and when I was growing up in it, it was already about 100 years old
Mm.
when I was a kid. And there were a lot of strange things that went on in the home when I was a kid, from boot steps on the stairs, uh, full body apparitions, things moving, and it got me really interested in the paranormal. And at the time, my parents did not like us to talk about it outside of the home, and in fact, they didn't really like us talking about it in the home. So I kind of dove in to learn everything I could. And later on, by the time I was 18, 17, 18, and my friends knew, they found out that my house was haunted, I started telling my stories. And it got me into not only studying the paranormal, but people bringing their stories to me. And then eventually me, finding people who've had the stories and uh, just going from there. And about 9 years ago, 8 years ago, I wrote my first book with the help of my wife. And it's just kind of snowballed from there with people contacting me from all over the world to talk about their paranormal stories.
That's awesome. I hear people who say that they grew up in a haunted house, and it's like, I hear knocking sometimes, or I hear maybe I've seen an apparition once or twice. But what you're talking about sounds absolutely horrifying. What's the scariest thing that you've ever experienced?
Oh boy, it's interesting because the scariest stuff was when I was younger and I was still trying to grasp all of this. One story that stands out, and always stands out to me, was the first time that I saw a full body apparition.
Mm.
And I'd just come home from school. I was in the eighth grade, and nobody was home. I was the first one home, and I made myself a sandwich and went into the front room. I was going to have a sandwich and watch TV. And I sat down, and before I could turn the TV on, I had some motion that caught my attention, and I turned, and here's this gentleman that I could see through, very tall, skinny, with a white shirt, overalls, and a wide brimmed hat. And he walked into the room and he sat across from me in the rocking chair and started rocking back and forth in the rocking chair. And I closed my eyes and I counted to 10 and I opened my eyes and he was gone, but the rocking chair continued to rock. So
Mm.
I jumped up and I ran to the front porch to wait until somebody got home. And my mother was the first one home. And that having been my first experience with a full body apparition, uh, it was kind of frightening for sure.
Yeah. What's the scariest story that somebody else has ever told you?
Oh, the scariest story somebody else has ever told me. Um, I've got so many that are kind of my favorite stories. Probably the ones. This is a good example of a story that I thought was a one-off story,
Mm.
and then when I published it, I had just a number of people contact me to say I had a similar experience. And what
Mm.
it was, it's in one of my older books, and it's called "Not My Cousin," is what it refers to. And this gentleman contacted me. And up here in northern Utah, everybody loves to camp. It's kind of because we're out in the wilderness, not that far away. And during the summertime, his family and extended family would go camping up Logan Canyon. And so him and his cousins were always playing around the camp, and he had one older cousin that was a couple years older than him that he really looked up to. And one afternoon they were like, "Oh, let's play hide and seek." And he got chosen to to seek everybody. So he counted and then started going around camp and finding a few of the other cousins. And um, something caught his attention, and further away from camp, near the bottom of this little canyon that went up, was his older cousin, and he was motioning for him to follow him. And so he walked over to where his cousin was, and before he got there, his cousin walked behind the tree and kind of disappeared. And he's looking all over, and suddenly his cousin is further up the trail into the woods, and he's standing there motioning for him to follow again. And this went on 2 or 3 times before he realized how far away from camp he was, and that he wasn't supposed to be that far away from camp. And he yelled out to his cousin, "I'm going, we're not supposed to be out here this far. I'm going back." And he just got a really creepy feeling. So he runs back to camp. And when he gets there, his cousin is sitting around the fire having a hot dog, and his mother's cooking hot dogs for the kids. And he gets mad at his cousin. He's like, "Why were you trying to lead me away from camp?" And his mother is like, "He's been here the whole time. He was hiding under the trailer when you were looking for everybody. Why did you wander off?" And so it was something in the woods that was trying to lure him away, and something very creepy. But what I found really fascinating is when I published that story, I had a half a dozen people contact me and say they had similar experiences where something was mimicking an older brother, an older cousin, somebody they looked up to, trying to lure them either into the woods or into abandoned buildings. And it was the same kind of MO where they didn't talk, but they motioned, and then they would disappear and be further and further into these abandoned buildings or into the forest. And so it's just a really creepy story to begin with. And then
Yeah.
to think that it's actually a phenomena that happens is even more creepy. So,
Yeah, I have that book.
oh, is
And
that, oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. And there were a lot of stories in there that I thought I had a grasp on the paranormal and like what's going on. There were all kinds of stories in there I'd never heard of before. So I imagine that when these people reach out to you and they tell you these stories, it's kind of like being a confessor, and they just have this weight that they have to get off because they have this person who is so willing to hear them and to believe them. Does it come across to you like that?
It does oftentimes.
Mm,
And in fact, a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago, I had a lady contact me and say she had a story. And so I was interviewing her over Skype. And she, was telling a story about how when she was little, her dad would come home drunk and just terrorize the family.
mm,
And when she was little, when that would happen, there was this old lady that would take her by the hand and hide her somewhere in the house and just keep her calm and talk to her, you know, while this was all going on, and kind of hid her away from her father. And as she's telling me the story, she stops, and the lady wasn't part of her family. She only showed up when this happened. And she stopped while she was telling me this, and she goes, "Do you believe what I'm telling you?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, First of all, you're really quiet." And I'm like, "Well, I'm taking notes and I'm really listening to you." And she goes, "Do you really believe me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you're telling me this story." And she broke down in tears because of all the people that she had tried to share that story with, nobody believed her. And the
mm,
fact that she found somebody that believed her, she just cried and cried and cried. And just the relief of finding somebody that could relate a little bit to
mhm,
the paranormal and stuff was
mhm.
just, it was very cathartic for her. She was just, which is a lot of, I understand what you do, to help
Yeah,
people through that kind of trauma. So it's kind of nice to be that sounding board and help people to realize they're not alone. I think that helps a lot of people.
yeah. Now, do you ever get people calling you up, and they have this story, and then you hear it and you're just like, okay, that's not paranormal, or okay, this person does have some sort of mental illness?
I don't know if I've necessarily interviewed people like that. I try and take, I have to go off of my gut when I
Mhm.
interview people and go through kind of the feeling of all of it. And you know, interview a lot of people, and not all of them get to go in the books, or because my wife, who's also my editor, helps me go through it. But honestly, I if there's so very few where I've interviewed people and it's felt disingenuous, if that
Mm.
makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
so few, really,
Mhm.
that I felt like it was disingenuous, or it was coming from maybe a mental health kind of place, kind of, you know. I was on a show, this has been quite a while ago, where we were taking callers, and there was a gentleman that called that was very obvious. He was fighting something other than what was paranormal, and they were able to, get him off of that line onto another line and get him some help that he was looking for. But that's about the only time I can think of that I've talked to somebody that would maybe have been something much more not paranormal, but more mental, I guess.
Well, so like you said, this is my business. And I can't, now that we're talking about it, I can't really think of a time when somebody has come to me with a paranormal story either, and it's been mental illness.
Right.
Not once. Every time they have said this is what it is, that's what it is.
Right, right. So, and I can understand. I When I take my stories, I will, if they don't want their name published or changed, I guess I do that because I understand the anonymity of it.
Sure.
But the further we go along, and I think the more shows like yours and my books, it's becoming much more healthy for people to be able to share that and
Yeah.
not be worried about the stigmatism behind it. So.
Mhm. Well, it's been good for me too because, like I said, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on it, and I'm learning lots just in doing the research to get this show started and talking with people like you. And I have a question that I'm hoping that you can answer for me. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So,
Yeah.
I live in a place where there's lots of haunted stuff, lots of haunted stuff. And there's this old house that used to be, well, it was used for a Civil War hospital, among other things. And so there was lots of sickness and death and all of this stuff here. They have paranormal investigations quite frequently. I've been there probably 3 times, and
Mm.
it always has activity. Always. So my first question about that, because they always do them in the middle of the night. Why is it in the middle of the night? I think that, if you're haunting, aren't you haunting 24/7? You know? Is there a rule about that?
Right. I've often wondered that myself, because I think back on the experiences I had growing up, and they were just as likely to happen
Oh,
at 1 o'clock in the afternoon as the middle of the night. So I think that it goes along a lot with the fact that it's quieter at night, and you might have less contamination. But from everybody that I interviewed and everything like that, paranormal can happen at any time and
okay.
out of the blue too,
Okay.
to people. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And another thing that I noticed when I've been at this place, so that it has 3 sections, and they'll have a group of investigators in each section, and then they rotate so that everybody can be everywhere without everybody being on top of each other. So if I'm in A, let's say, there's activity in B and C, not in A. And then as soon as I get to B or C, it's gone.
It's
Any
gone.
idea why that happens?
I think that some people, it's hard to say, but I do believe that some people tend to draw it to them more
Mm,
easily than others.
hmm.
And even if, say, for example, you're in a group and one of the people in that group is drawing attention, then everybody might be able to see that a little better. But I think it's a lot like, I relate it a little bit, at least ghost hunting, I relate a little bit to fishing, because it has a little bit to do with skill and a little bit to do with luck. And so you got to be in the right place at the right time. And so I think that could have a lot to do with it as well.
Hmm. Okay. I've heard stories about smells. Lots of stories about smells. Like, this is my grandmother's smell. This is my grandfather's smell. And then I've heard stories about like not nice smells. And I was in this haunted house. It's a different one, but also was used as a Civil War hospital where lots of people died, and they were kept in the cellar while they were waiting to be, I don't know, buried or transported or something. But they had a lot of bodies in the cellar, and they were having a paracon there. And I went up in the upstairs of the house, and it just smelled so bad. And it's an old house; it's not used. I guess they were just renting it because of special events or whatever. And it, like I said, it smelled like the plumbing was just really, really bad.
Mm.
And I didn't really think anything of it. But then the next day I was up there and it was in a totally different place. And I'm like, okay, that's not the toilet. So do you have any idea like when a energy manifests like that? I can get when it's a nice smell. You know, if your grandmother wants you
Mhm.
to know that she's there, that makes sense. But if it's a nasty smell like that, any idea why that happens?
It could be just the fact that it's, especially in an area like that, the reason it's probably got so much activity is because it is connected so much to war and,
Mm,
you know, everything that's attached to that because it's very violent. It's very smelly. It's really, horrible. And so I think that's where a lot of that energy is coming from. Just, and of course, it's going to bring that kind of smell, as if when you were there during the battle, because,
I never
those
thought of that.
hospitals just
I
smell
never
so
thought of
bad.
that. That's
Yeah.
probably exactly what it smelled like. You're right. It probably
Yeah.
did smell like death.
Mhm. Death and bile and everything
Mm,
else that you would have because, we think of hospitals as very clean and now they kind of are, but back then they didn't even know so much about, infection or anything like that. So the people brought into the hospital weren't cleaned up and so
mm.
yeah, it would have smelled just like that. So
That totally
that's
makes sense.
probably what it is. Yeah.
So when I see scary movies, and you can't smell things on a scary movie, but it seemed to me like the smell, the nasty smell, was associated with like an evil presence. But it make what you're saying makes more sense because I didn't feel anything malicious about it at all. It was just nasty smelling.
Yeah. Yep. And it's the same with just a lot of things that would come through because of the war and those feelings that um, kind of I guess ruminate and charge an area like that
Mm.
paranormally. So yeah, the smell of that time would come flooding back. And like you say, it's not evil or mean or anything like that. It's just kind of what it is. It's kind of, that feeling of that time, just another way for it to manifest in this space.
So it sounded like part of the thing that makes people afraid of these things is their ideas that go with it. Like if I had smelled that and been like, "Oh my God, there's an evil presence," I probably would have been scared. I just didn't
Hmm.
know what it was. I was like, "Ooh, that's bad."
It's
Um,
nasty.
and that goes along too with the idea of people not wanting a house where somebody has died. Back in the day, everybody died at home. I hope I die at home in my bed
Yeah.
in peace. So, do you think that it's a bad thing or a like a red flag if somebody lives in a house where somebody died?
I don't think so. For the most part, and through everything that I do, I end up helping a lot of people too, because of the stories and everything I've done. I've had many people contact me and say, I think I have a ghost or I have this problem or something like that. And while I'm helping them, I let them know, when you're dealing with a spirit in the form of somebody that used to live in the house, somebody that was alive before. Um, it's just like if you met 10 people on the street, 9 of those people would be normal, nice individuals. It's that 10th one that you got to look out for because he might have been, and my whole point is if you're a jerk in life, you're probably going to be a jerk in the afterlife. You
Yeah.
take it with you. And so a lot of times when I help people, it's, finding out that, maybe, the spirit that died in the house, they still consider that their house.
Mm.
And a lot of times it's just, letting them know that, you're scaring my kids when they see you, or, if you could not show yourself to me, that scares me, or, and they may not even understand that coming from that side. And it's amazing to me how many people who've contacted me who've said, I think I have a spirit, and we do research and we help them. And it's just, and it sounds really weird, but it's just being very vocal in your own space, saying, I know that you lived here before. I know you died here. I know this is your house or was your house. It's my house now. You're perfectly fine to stay here. Just don't show yourself to me. Don't let me know you're here. And it goes away, which is really, it's kind of fascinating
Hmm.
that that happens that way. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that when somebody passes away in the house. No. Um, Again, it
Okay.
just goes back to the type of people they were in life. So
So what you were just saying brought me back to when you were a kid. Did you ever find out who or what was making all that stuff happen?
yeah, so at least one of them. I know there's several ghosts in the house just from the different things going on. There's one that loves to play pranks. It's just such a prankster. And then the one that we called the man in the hat, which is the one the first one I saw. So we all had experiences seeing the man in the hat. And my grandparents lived about not very far away when I was growing up. And my grandpa had passed away, and then my grandma passed away. And so we were cleaning out their house, and I came across a really old photo album. And I was just flipping through it because, it's fascinating to see old photo albums. And I flipped the page and I almost fell over because there's a picture of my house that I grew up in with, an old black and white with a man, and it's him with the long, tall, skinny. He's even got the white shirt and overalls and hat standing in front of my house. So I got flipped it over, looked, got the name, went through. Come to find out that it was a great great uncle that owned that house in during the 20s, during the Depression and right before the Depression, and he had passed away in that house. So it's actually a relative that is still in the house. So, um, and like I said, nothing ever evil or malevolent about what was going on, but definitely prankster stuff has gone on in the house throughout the years. So,
So did you, now that you know that it was a family member, was there any story about why this person would be lingering around? Did he die
mm,
violently or no?
no, I think he died of old age in the house, from what I could tell.
Hmm.
Um, when like you say, back then people mostly pass away
Yeah.
in their homes, which a lot of people still do. And so, yeah, nothing. Um, in fact, it's funny because I found, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, I was helping clean the basement, and we found some old charcoal paintings there. They used to have artists that would go around before. Well, they still had photographs, but it was cheaper to have somebody who was really good artist do a charcoal painting of people. And I found three of them in the house, and one of them was of him, which was kind of interesting, and then his wife. And so I've kind of just gone through the genealogy to look and see their family. And other than the original person that built the house and then sold it, it's actually been in my family since um, 1915,
Wow.
right around there. So
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And one of the stories in, well, a couple of the stories in your book, the one that I read, it was book 6. Um, there were like menacing things that were chasing people and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Do So I gotta tell you that before I got into all of this, I just I don't know. I guess I would have said I was a skeptic. I just didn't really think there's no demons. There's things that are going to hurt you. You're not physical. They can't manifest like that. But there's lots and lots of stories like that where people, or it's not people, entities, energies, they have footprints and smells and hair and things like this. They're
Hmm.
not ghosts. What do you think they are?
I think that's the golden question of exactly what they are, because like you said, they don't, they're not like ghosts where they leave, footprints, or they leave, marks. And it makes you really wonder what exactly is out there. I'll tell you that when I first started this a long time ago, there were several things that, I was skeptical of and thought I would never get stories of. And it was some of those, including, stories of um, what's called the Fae, which are
Mhm.
creatures from all over the world, which I never thought, I always figured they were, like you said, just folklore and just made up things. And the more I've interviewed people and the more I've gotten stories from all over, the more I'm kind of in your camp where, what is it? It's physical and yet not physical at the same time. And there's many I guess belief systems, including like Native Americans talk about like Sasquatch or other creatures that are both physical and non-physical creatures at the same time, which is really strange to us, and it's kind of strange to me. But that's a good question of what they actually are. I'm not sure, and that's kind of why I keep going to try and figure out some of this stuff and hopefully come across some answers of what they actually are.
So I feel goofy asking this question.
No, there's no there's no bad questions, trust me.
So I've never seen one of these creatures, so I think it's kind of rare, but obviously it happens because there's lots of people with stories like this. So it kind of feels like this could happen at any time and to anyone. Do you have any ideas of how to stay safe?
Well, my biggest thing is, and this is funny too, because growing up, growing up kind of in northern Utah, and we're right next to the wilderness. Like I'm 10 minutes from a hike or being in the mountains. I used to go all the time alone, fishing or
Me
hiking.
too.
And yeah, and I won't do that even in my older age. I won't do that anymore. Just I think that staying with another person is going to help you a lot.
Really? Okay.
And then that goes, that's kind of, smart in the long run anyway,
Sure.
in case, you get hurt or you fall down. But yeah, I just can't bring myself, after everything that I've learned, I can't bring myself to go in the mountains alone anymore. I mean, I will go on the, fishing a little bit on my own and stuff, but anything away from the road or anything, I have to have somebody with me just to
Oh,
to feel safe, if that makes sense.
that
So
makes me so sad because I love being out in nature all by
yeah.
myself. I mean, I think it's just the most wonderful natural thing. And I know that like there's some woods near me where there's this legend of a woman in white. She's got a white dress on and she calls people. So speaking about that, but it's not like
Mm.
I'm calling your name necessarily. She's just calling to people. And I've never heard her, but people are kind of freaked out about that. And the only thing that in those woods that I've noticed, one time we were out there and there was just no sounds at all. No
Oh yeah.
birds, you couldn't hear a cricket. I'm like, this is so bizarre. This is so bizarre. And I was out there with a bunch of people from the city. They don't know the wood sounds. They were just like, what? What? I'm like, no, there's something really wrong here. So, maybe she was there, she didn't pop out, but there was some, I mean, I guess that's a sign.
It really is actually. A lot of the people that I've interviewed, and have experiences in the woods, that's the first thing they mention, is it
That's not
goes dead
normal.
silent. Yeah, it goes just dead silent, and the bugs aren't talking, birds aren't talking, nobody's
Yeah.
talking, and yeah, that's one of the first signs for sure. But yeah.
Now, what's the difference between somebody who runs to high strangeness, somebody who runs away, and then the ones who's like, "Oh, that's just an owl. That's just a weather balloon."
Right. Yeah, I think, a lot of people are a lot of people I know, at least that I've talked to, have been just very skeptical, and they're like, "Oh, that's not real." People are making it up or it's whatever until they have their own experience, and then they're
Mm.
like, "Whoa!" And it's funny because some people react by wanting to know everything they can and kind of like you say, chasing it. And there's a lot of people that are like, "Nope, I just never ever
Mm.
want to be anywhere near that again. I'll do whatever I can to be not near that." So it affects people differently for sure.
Well, do you think with TikTok and you're able to just upload anything whenever you want? Do you think that that has changed the stigma around these types of experiences?
I think it has. Yeah, I think that a lot of multimedia have helped people connect. That's another thing too. People who are interested in the paranormal, um, people who are interested in Bigfoot or UFOs are able to find, you know, their people kind of a deal where, you know, even 20, 30 years ago, you may be in a community and you're the only one that's had an experience, and so it's hard to relate. But now, you've got TikTok, you've got Reddit, you've got all these different things where you can connect to other people and try and, find out what's going on or what your experience was about, which I think is a good thing.
And so, how has being a paranormal investigator impacted your life?
It's actually got me. What I love about it is that I've been able to meet so many different people from all over the world. Whether I'm doing like an interview like with you, or having people contact me with their story, just to be able to connect with people all over the world. It's really kind of cool. Because I can say, oh yeah, I've got friends from all over that I wouldn't have if
Yeah,
this wasn't what I was doing. So.
yeah. Well, I think your books and your work have positively impacted people's lives because it does give them a way to be validated and heard by somebody who has a reputation, and that carries clout. So I want to thank you for
Mm.
that and give
Oh,
you the
well,
last
thank you
word.
for
So
saying
what?
that.
Yeah, what do you want people to know about paranormal experiences or about you?
You know what? I would just say that, if you've had a paranormal experience, you're not alone for sure.
Hmm.
And there's people like me, and then people like you who want to document it, whether it's on the podcast or whether it's on a book. And, don't be afraid to share that. And, just if you also enjoy the strange and the unusual, the books are out there, my books are out there, other people's, and it doesn't, this is the one thing I like to tell people. It doesn't have to be a Halloween thing. Everybody gets excited at Halloween, but you can experience that kind of fun all year long. So,
True. So thank you for being here, John. Your contact information is in the show notes. If anybody has a story that wants to share it with him, you can contact him there. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing.
thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.